Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. We now have a new addition to our background set in the form of a crocheted baby Yoda made by my lovely friend for me. He's going to be supervising and making sure that everything runs in tip-top shape. Today I am going to finish off my undergrad review of my archaeology degree, so we're going to cover my 4th year now that we've done all the previous 3 years and the past 2 summers of field school digging in the Kingdom of Jordan. Once again, I had a reduced course load for that year because the previous summer I had taken an advanced field archaeology course when I was digging in Jordan, a supervisor level course, and that counted for 1 full credit. Usually classes only counted for a half credit. That course was a full credit, so that meant that my 4th year I could essentially take 4 classes a semester instead of 5. This year was quite a deviation from my normal courses as well, because as I was finishing up my degree I actually had some space to take quite a few electives, and I still kind of stuck to like the history heritage trend, but I went outside of the archaeology department to do that. My fall semester was very much dominated by the classical courses. If you haven't watched my previous videos, which you really should, I started off as a Near Eastern civilizations major, but then about halfway through my degree I decided to change and double up and do Near Eastern and classical civilizations, because this would let me avoid to take a statistics class, which I wanted to do because I'm horrible at math. My fall semester basically meant that I was catching up on a lot of my classics courses to make sure that I had all the required courses for that part of the degree. Required courses I was taking that semester were the Greek Bronze Age and the history of ancient Greece. Quite a bit of overlap in those courses, and I had taken previous classics courses before, so I wouldn't necessarily say that any of the material was particularly new to me. For my Greek Bronze Age class, my paper for that class that I had to write was Heinrich Schliemann, who is a famous and controversial quote-unquote archaeologist. Don't know if I would necessarily call him that, who discovered the famous city of Troy in Turkey, and then the grave circles at Mycenae, which include those very famous the gold masks and the Mask of Agamemnon, which is a misnomer. For my paper, my topic was the grave circles at Mycenae, which meant I had to read his like dig journal, his log of everything that was found, and do some analysis and talk about it, which as a modern archaeologist was, I would say, painful. Just because obviously, you know, they didn't have the advantage of all of the techniques and things that we know and methodologies that we have today when they were digging. This is not a direct quote, but a summary. But every time that they were taking the masks off a lot of these skeletons, then they were touching what's underneath, it just would tend to disintegrate into dust and bone shards, which is obviously not ideal. And the same thing was probably going to happen to the body that was underneath the Mask of Agamemnon. After they took the mask off, he paid a local artist to fill the grave cut with a resin in order to try and preserve the body, and he also commissioned an artist to make a sketch of the body in the grave because they didn't have cameras in order to take a picture. So I can totally get behind him wanting to try and preserve it as much as he could. The cast or the resin of this body was then lifted out of the grave and is somewhere in the basement at the Museum of Athens. When I did the paper, they had kind of recently gone through the archives and found boxes that they think were what this was, and somebody tried to do an osteological study on it. Then there's all these stories how it might have been an Egyptian princess that came over. When you look at the artist rendering of it, I don't know about you, but to me it looks like an alien, which is a whole nother bunch of conspiracy theories as well, but it was an insight into the past of archaeology that I found quite fascinating, to be honest. Next, history of Greece. I think my paper for this class was on the Olympics, and this, I think, but I'm not entirely sure because I took a couple different courses with the same professor and I don't remember when exactly this happened, but in one of his courses, and it might have been this one, I did a paper on the Olympics. I ended up having to rewrite it. He asked me to come to him after class after it had been submitted and basically told me that I had missed the point. I had really focused on like the historical and written aspect of the Olympics rather than the archaeological aspect of it, which is what he wanted the paper to focus on. So he gave me, I think, a week to rewrite it and resubmit it, which I did, and I managed to still get I think an okay grade. I don't remember exactly what I got in the paper, but I passed the class and I did fine. The first elective that I took in this period was History of Imperial Russia from 1703 to 1917. This was a class that fell under the history department, and I chose this elective partially because A, it was going to be a bit different than what I was used to, and B, because I've always had a fascination with the Romanovs. When I saw that particular class was on offer, I decided to take it, and I really enjoyed taking it. The professor was very informed. He really knew what he was talking about. The final paper I wrote for that class was on Catherine the Great, her memoirs. I did a bit of an analysis of it and then compared it to things that people have said about her. My last elective for the fall semester was a medieval studies course called Sex and Marriage in Medieval Europe, which I kind of chose on a whim. I would say that I picked right. This ended up being one of my favorite classes that I took in my undergrad, a class that I still talk about in conversation almost a decade later. It definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things, because I'm not sure about you guys, but for me, when you learn about medieval history, there's a lot of emphasis obviously on the church. They had a major influence throughout Western Europe at that time, and you know, they're very much about purity, chastity, following the rules, and everyone kind of neatly lining up in their lane and just doing whatever the church tells them to, especially when it comes to sex and marriage. So you're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage, before marriage. One of the things that I really started to learn in this class was that might have been what they said they wanted, doesn't necessarily mean that was what everybody was doing. I certainly don't think before this point I was aware that there was actually a time in the history of the Catholic Church that priests did have wives, and then after a certain point a pope said, no, you can't do this, you have to be chaste. And even then, a lot of priests, especially higher ranking priests and even popes, still had mistresses and children, so they weren't even necessarily following their own rules. So if you think about that's what the church was doing, also applies to everybody else. Obviously there were people that were devout and they followed these rules of the church, but as I learned in this course, there were a lot of people that also didn't. Highlights of this course. The teacher actually read us a poem from, I think, the 15th century Scotland that a daughter of a noble lord wrote about the anatomy of her confessor, who was her lover. I very distinctly remember giggles and my teacher blushing quite a lot when that was being read aloud to the class. Learned a lot about nuns and how they were, I don't know if I'd say up to no good, but you know, there were all these rules had to be put in place about when the lights were supposed to go out, how they were supposed to stay in bed, and things that they were getting up to after dark. That was eye-opening. Some of the artwork, for example, penis trees. These are a thing in medieval literature. Nuns are harvesting them. Definitely not something that I would have thought would have been a phenomenon in medieval art, but there definitely are. John/Eleanor Reichner, which is probably one of the first trans people recorded in history. This person, their sex was male, but they would dress as a woman and go out and prostitute themselves. I'm not quite sure what gender pronouns John/Eleanor would have preferred, so I'm just gonna use they, them, and got arrested multiple times for prostitution and said that they wouldn't do it again and then would go out and do it again. This was in the late 1300s, early 1400s London, and certainly wouldn't have been the only person that was doing this, but is, I think, probably either the or one of the first recorded transgender people in medieval history, which was quite cool to learn about. Another topic was health and everything. We've learned about hysteria and wandering wombs, where they thought that if a woman was suffering too much from hysteria, your uterus would basically burst out of your stomach and strangle you. All about the four humors. Honestly, fascinating stuff. So that's my fall semester, which ended in December 2011. Going forward into January 2012, I began my last semester of my undergraduate degree. As I've mentioned previously, I had already discovered that osteology and the study of human skeletal remains was something that I was interested in pursuing at a postgraduate level. So I was trying to kind of bulk up my student CV, so to say, to get into a master's program. So I had already taken basic osteology course that was offered by my university. I had gone and done an osteology field school that previous summer in Jordan, and now I was taking another osteo course. However, this was not offered by my university. Now, where I'm from, there are actually two universities in very close proximity to each other. They are literally about maybe a couple blocks away from each other. Wilfrid Laurier University and University of Waterloo. I went to Laurier, and there was a agreement or something that sometimes when a course you needed or you wanted to take wasn't available at Laurier, you could actually go across to Waterloo and take that course, and it would still count and have the same weight and everything as a course if you took it at Laurier. So there weren't any more osteo courses that I was interested in at Laurier at that point. However, there was one at Waterloo, and this was skeletal biology and forensics by Dr. Mariah Liston. She's very famous. She works in the Athenian Agora. This course was very much about going in and applying a lot of the osteological methods that we had already learned about. So you cover anatomy and the basics of Wickstra and Nubelaker standards, which is kind of like the Bible when it comes to a lot of osteological analysis in your first courses, but this kind of really went into depth. So we were looking at, you know, determining age, sex, pathology on skeletons. We also did dental casts of skeletons. We looked at identifying multiple number of individuals. We looked at cremated remains and trying to identify what kind of bones were present, which was quite difficult, much less having to try and identify sex or age as well. We also did some facial reconstructions. So we had some plastic cast skulls, so they're not real human skulls, but they're based on real human skulls. We were put into groups and we each got a skull, and then we were given instructions on how to start doing facial reconstruction, and we did it with plasticine and fake eyeballs and wigs. That was a bit of a crafty project, which I don't think mine turned out fabulous, but I think it was a good attempt for a first try. Much more of a focus on a wider range of topics than just the basics, and a really good foundation for me, I think, going forward into my master's course, so I was really glad that I took that. Next, we have another classics course, the Art and Architecture of Greece. Again, might have been the course where I screwed up one of the essays and the prof gave me a chance to redo it, but honestly, I can't remember. And after a while, everything tends to blur together a bit. I think they were also all in the same classroom, so it's a bit hard for me to separate them all out. My last elective course, I went back to the Medieval Studies department for East and West, the Byzantine Empire. Chosen because it was different. I know and have learned so much about medieval Western Europe, and then also Greece, Rome, and the Middle East. It was kind of refreshing to do something a little bit different, especially because I feel like the Byzantine Empire gets glossed over, occupies this middle ground between the East and the West, and then gets kind of ignored by the histories of both a little bit. One of the things that I didn't really know going into it was that it was very much the continuation of Rome and the Roman Empire after Rome got sacked by the Visigoths. My final paper that I did for this class was on a bunch of their empresses, Zoe in particular. So my last class of the winter semester and of my undergrad is Burial Customs in the Ancient Levant, which is also kind of my thesis class. Now, it's obviously different all over the world. Very much in the UK, you are expected as a part of your undergraduate degree to write a thesis for your last year, and it generally takes you about a year to write. It's not necessarily something that you're doing as a part of a class, I think, but as someone who didn't do an undergraduate over here, I can't really say for sure. But in Canada, or at least in the program that I was in, we didn't have an overarching year-long thesis that we had to write per se. However, in this burial customs class, I had to write the longest and most detailed paper I've ever done, so I kind of consider it to be my thesis. And treat for you guys today, I still have it. So this is what I kind of consider to be my undergraduate thesis. The title is New Kingdom Grave Goods and Images, so obviously I chose to do it on ancient Egypt in line with my initial interest in Egyptology. The longest and most detailed paper that I had written up to this point. It ended up being 36 pages, but it is single-sided, so it's maybe not as long as I thought it was. Now that I've written a master's thesis and other things for work that are much longer than this, my opinion would be different, but at the time, this was daunting. I can't remember if we were given topics to choose from or if we got to pick our own topic, but the basic idea was that you would pick something that you could then go and make a database with all the data, and then you could do an analysis of that data and talk about it in your paper. If you guys want to know more about my quote-unquote thesis, what I wrote about and how I did this paper, please let me know in the comments, because I can always do a much more in-depth coverage of this. The basics were I made a giant Excel database, I went through a bunch of tombs, I recorded stuff, and then I compared everything and I wrote about it. So I have a lot of pie charts and just general charts in here to look at these trends that I included. Writing this was very stressful, but I managed to do it. At this point, I was living back at my parents' house because my parents live within a commutable distance to my university. So I was at home at this time. I can remember very clearly, at least I think either the day before or the week before that I finished this paper, I was, staying up quite late to do it. And my dad came home late from like playing pool or doing something. And he came in and he was like, "Are you still working?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have to get this finished." And he was like, "No, just go to bed. It's not that big of a deal. You can do it tomorrow." And I snapped and had like almost a full-on breakdown being like, "You don't understand. I have to get this done. I just have to do it. Just leave me alone and let me just write my paper." That's kind of the closest I've ever come to like a full breakdown. Warning that it was due. I have memories of printing up all the spreadsheets at home and then taping them together so that you could like fold them out and see the whole thing together. Because obviously these were the days when you printed everything out rather than just putting it on a disc or a USB stick and handing it in for your professor to look at. But I managed to get it done. I don't think I did amazing at it, but I got a decent enough mark and I passed the exams. I managed to pass that course, and with that got all of the courses I needed in order to graduate. And then I went to Jordan for the third time because clearly we've learned that I can't get enough. I had been offered again to go back to Jordan. I got a further discount on my field school for the third time to participate, and as well that year a bunch of my friends who had gone the first time around were returning for their second time. So it was kind of going to be our great renaissance and our last big trip together. Even though I obviously graduated, I actually ended up missing the actual graduation ceremony for my undergraduate because I was in Jordan and I didn't want to come home a week early. So you can just tell by that how much I really loved being there. That will be the next story in this series. And then I think I'm going to do a video on my master's. I can do a video on my master's thesis as well, and the time that I spent in Bulgaria doing fieldwork for my master's thesis. So I still have a couple of videos in this vein in store for you guys. But that's everything for today. As per usual, I hope this has been informative and given you guys a little bit of an idea of what to expect, even though obviously this changes for each person and each university. But these were the courses I took, these were the experiences I had. I can definitely say I was very sorry at the end of them to see them go. I still have the rosiest of glasses when I look back at my undergraduate experience, and if I had a time machine, that's probably the first place on my list that I would go back and relive if I had a choice. It was an amazing, informative period of my life, and really a time where I think I really grew into myself and discovered a lot about who I am as a person and as an adult. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, please put them in the comment box down below. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't watched any of the previous videos talking about my first, second, and third year, or my first 2 summers digging in Jordan, please check those out as well. If you'd like to see more from me, if you'd like to continue seeing more from me, please subscribe and hit that bell so that you get notifications whenever I put out new videos. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!